How should Mitch Marner be remembered for his time as a Toronto Maple Leaf? Hey everyone, welcome to Inside the Leafs. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto Sun Maple Leafs writer Terry Koshan, who's got a long read up on the Toronto Sun right now about Mitch Marner's time in Toronto as a Maple Leaf. And Terry, as you lay out in your piece, it's a long and complicated history with number 16, numerous ups, numerous downs. As we sit here today, looking back at Marner's time in Toronto, how will you view it?
Well, it's like you said, complicated, Rob. I mean, complicated, yes, but also fairly simple. If the playoff performances and production match the regular season production performance, we're not having this conversation today. There hasn't been all of this angst, if you will, or speculation for the past several weeks as to his future and where he's going to wind up signing. It just wouldn't happen. You would assume that if a lot of the playoff, say you don't win the Stanley Cup during this past, 5, 6, 7 years, but if you're knocking on the door, Rob, like say the Edmonton Oilers are, like the Florida Panthers did a few years ago before they won, then things might be different. The fact of the matter is, when you only win the first round twice in that span, you're not knocking in any door. You're just another playoff team, and he's been a big part of that. So if that's different, then like I said, you and I aren't talking about this right now, and neither is anybody else in all likelihood. I don't know if the sides would have negotiated necessarily during the season, because that's not really how Darren Ferris works with his clients. But still, I think there would have been a lot more optimism here as to a continuation. And the other things that wouldn't happen either was there wouldn't have been, for sure, the backlash, I don't think, against Mitch Marner like there has been. And, the pointing of fingers as being more that he's been the guy for why they haven't had the success when, Austin Matthews and William Nylander have just been a big part of it as Marner has. So it is complicated, but like I said, if you come down to those basics, Rob, I think the overall it's a much different conversation today.
Yeah, it definitely is. And there were numerous times throughout his Maple Leafs tenure where there were conversations about potentially trading him to another team to get some different assets and change up the DNA, as Brad Treliving talked about in his season-ending news conference. But when you look back at the potential chances or opportunities that the Maple Leafs could have done anything differently, do you think now with hindsight 2020 that it would have been the right move, or did it just sort of end up the way it did just because of Brendan Shanahan's Shana plan and the decisions that were made that ultimately got us to where we are?
Yeah, I don't know if they could have, to be quite honest. We have to remember the Maple Leafs, they draft a kid out of London whose talent is off the charts. We get that. Then, he goes through rough patches with Mike Babcock, but he, as we're sitting here today, he comes out of it as one of the better defensive players in the league. So individual wise, I don't think there could have been much of a difference, Rob. I mean, the guy is a hell of an all-around player, period. Now you look at it and say, well, what about around him? And again, some of the things the Maple Leafs did, did they build incorrectly? I'm not sure about that. I mean, when you have, Matthews and Nylander and Marner and John Tavares on the 7-year deal going back to 2018, you'd like to think that things eventually go in your favor. That didn't happen. At times they had the goaltending. They ran up against teams that were better than them in the playoffs, and you look at it and go, why couldn't they have been coming out on the right side of an upset? A lot of it's circumstantial, but I don't think that the Leafs failed in that regard. Now, having said that, you look at some of the moves that were made outside of Mitch Marner, and if you could have a do-over, do you trade Nazem Kadri? Do you lose the patience with him and trade him to Colorado like you did in a trade that wound up being lopsided with the way that Tyson Barrie did or didn't perform for the Leafs? I mean, so you've lost that element and you've never regained it. Zach Hyman leaving for Edmonton a few years ago now, and really blossoming there. The Leafs could have used him too. I understand, of course, that the salary cap works into all this, but a guy like Kadri, he's just never been replaced. And, he's the type of person that the Leafs really need now. But, it's been a good hockey team. Again, this conversation might be different if you look at it and go, okay, well, the Leafs scraped in every year and barely made it in the playoffs and just, had to survive. But that didn't happen. As we know, the regular seasons have become habitually 100 points. So the team was there. I don't know if they could have done anything differently. And really trading him or whatever else, you're not doing that at this age. You want the best to happen here, and it didn't happen.
So as of this recording, Mitch Marner is not with a new team just yet, but we are working under the assumption, 99.9%, as you say in the piece, that he will not be returning to join the Toronto Maple Leafs. A lot of talk about where he could potentially go, Terry, maybe to a quote-unquote smaller market where there is less attention. There's not too many markets that have more attention in Toronto, so that would be a challenge. But on the same token, if you're signing a $13 million plus deal, you're going to get a lot of the attention as the highest paid player on a team. Do you think that he can be the guy somewhere else?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I do. But having said that, I think that if he's signing with one of these teams that's is rumored out there, whether it's Vegas, Rob, or Carolina, or the Los Angeles Kings, take your pick. A lot of these clubs already have the guy or many of these types of players that could be the guy, right? So I don't know that necessarily has to be that person. Can that team succeed if Marner is it? I think it can. Because again, he's still hitting his prime here in the midst of his prime. It's not like he's at the tail end or by any stretch of the imagination. So, does he have the mental makeup for that? Well, in a different marketplace, we'll see if that is a factor or not. But certainly you're right. The attention will not be there that he's had in Toronto, and some of the off-ice things that he's had to put up with won't be there. More of a thing where any of those places we mentioned, can lead his life a little more simply than perhaps here. And he's not going to be the hometown guy anymore. No matter where he winds up, that it wasn't his childhood dream to play for that team, because it was always to play for the blue and white in the National Hockey League. So, yeah, it's wherever he does wind up, we know that team is getting one of the premier players in the league. There's no doubt about that. What becomes of it, we'll have to see. Certainly, we know, Rob, that lesser players have left the Maple Leafs and gone on to win the Stanley Cup. Phil Kessel, Tyler Bozak, go back to Kadri, had winning with Colorado. So that does happen, and I think you'd have to brace yourself for that possibility when Marner is gone, assuming that he is. Like we said, we're awfully close to 100% on this, but. I think for me, it's going to be fascinating to see how the rest of his NHL career unfolds. And, if you're Maple Leafs fans, you have to. It's a bit of a conundrum, right? Because you know that if there was a way that he stayed, he's going to help you get 100 points in the regular season. And then you say, well, does 1 year this actually work in the playoffs? Well, it looks like we're never going to know. So I think that he'll have a great opportunity to win as long as he signs with one of these teams that seems to be already there. And now there's talk perhaps of a bridge deal, and see if that happens, where he signs for a couple of years and then, refocuses once the cap goes up. But we'll have to see.
Well, he may no longer be a Maple Leaf, but I think a lot of people are still going to be keeping tabs on what Mitch Marner does heading into the second half here of his career, no longer as a Toronto Maple Leaf. How will you remember Mitch Marner as a Toronto Maple Leaf? Let us know in the comments section below. For Terry Koshan, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.